Okay, here we go. This is the endocrine system. And class, you're going to need to use your printout that you got from Zerobio on the endocrine system, glands and hormones of the endocrine system. But first of all, what I want to do is I want to go over the mode of action of hormones. So this is from the first printout, and you should have drawn these diagrams from the textbook. And here we go. Now, this first one here deals with steroid hormones. And so just find in your notes the diagram that you drew. All right, so maybe teacher pause this for a second and let the class find that diagram. All right, so let's assume that you've got the diagram, and let's have a look at the steroid. Now, you guys might remember that we've drawn steroid hormones in class before, and of course, steroids are derived from cholesterol, and cholesterol is a 4 fused ring structure. Now, this one only draws the 3 rings, but normally there'd be 1, 2, 3, and there'd be a 3rd ring up here as well. So just, forget about that for a second. Just assume that that's the steroid hormone right there. We could be talking about estrogen or progesterone or one of those. So the steroid hormone is going to be produced from the source. So this is going to be the source cell. Let's pretend we're talking about testosterone here. So this is going to be a cell in the testes, or if this was estrogen, this would be a cell in the ovaries. So the source cell is going to release the hormone, and it's going to travel into the bloodstream. So the hormone diffuses through the bloodstream, and because steroids are in the lipid category, they are lipid soluble. So recall, this is the phospholipid bilayer right here. All right. And we've talked about this before. The steroid hormone, because it's lipid soluble, can go right through the cell membrane. So this is what the hormone does. It goes through the cell membrane, and then it's going to bind to a receptor that is in the cytoplasm. So this is the cytoplasm of the target cell. So if this is testosterone, then a target cell is often going to be, say, muscle, because the steroid hormone testosterone leads to the building of more muscle. So assume this is a muscle cell here, and the hormone diffuses right through the cell membrane, and then it binds to a receptor that's sitting in the cytoplasm, one that fits it. Now we've got what's called a hormone receptor complex, and that's indicated here. The hormone receptor complex, this combination here, then diffuses into the nucleus of that target cell, of the muscle, and it's going to interact with the DNA. Now, we're going to study this more when we get to the genetic strand, but what the steroid hormone will do is interact with the DNA and sort of switch it on so that the DNA then causes the production of proteins. And this is a process called protein synthesis, and we're going to study that in the genetic strand as well. It's a rather complex 2-stage process where this molecule is made, step 1. This is called messenger RNA, and then the messenger RNA is translated on a ribosome, step 2, that's a ribosome, to produce this. This here is a chain of amino acids. That's the protein. So this is called protein synthesis, and the steroid leads to the production of proteins. All right, and that's what steroid hormones do. So if this is testosterone and this is a muscle cell, then the proteins are likely going to be components of a protein. So testosterone leads to muscle production. And this is why in males, when they reach puberty and the testes start to release testosterone, that males start to develop more muscles. All right, now that is called the mode of action of steroid hormones. This is how they work. Release from source cell, traveling through the blood to the target cell, binding to a receptor in the cytoplasm to form a hormone receptor complex, diffusing into the nucleus, stimulating the DNA to produce proteins. So the final effect is the protein production for the mode of action of steroid hormones. Now, because that protein has to be created from scratch, all right, it didn't exist before, this is a relatively slow process. Steroid hormones do not work as quickly as the other process we're going to talk about here for amino acid or peptide hormones. So let's talk about that now. Let's imagine that this triangle shape here is adrenaline. All right. Adrenaline is a modified amino acid. It is not a steroid. Modified amino acid produced by the source cell. Now, if this is adrenaline, then the source for this is the adrenal gland. All right. There we got the kidney here. I'm going to draw a kidney, the ureter coming out where urine comes out. And that there is the adrenal gland. All right, we're going to look at that in the endocrine histology lab. So the adrenal gland produces adrenaline, which travels through the bloodstream. So here it is being released. It's going to go through the bloodstream and it's going to go down to a target cell. Now, adrenaline has effects on many tissues. Let's pretend, though, that this is a heart cell. And adrenaline is going to have an effect on the heart cell, which is therefore the target. The target of steroids was a muscle cell. The target of adrenaline is a heart cell. Now, amino acids often have charged regions to them. The carboxyl or the amino group is charged. Because of that, they're not lipid soluble. So they can't just travel through the phospholipid bilayer. Like remember when we did the hydrogen ions in the mitochondrion, they can't get through that membrane. So this amino acid hormone, adrenaline, is going to attach to a receptor that's on the cell membrane. So here's adrenaline. It's going to bind to its complementary receptor on the target cell. And only the target cells have those receptors. If this was a cell in the hand, let's say, it would not have receptors for adrenaline. Therefore, adrenaline will not affect that cell. Because remember, these hormones, whether it's steroid or amino acid or whatever, they are traveling through the bloodstream and they're going to affect millions of cells. They're going to hit millions of cells by traveling through the bloodstream. But only some cells are going to respond to them. And the only cells that respond are ones with receptors. And therefore, they're called target cells. Now, when adrenaline binds to its receptor, there is a hormone receptor complex produced, and this hormone receptor complex stimulates an enzyme. Now, there's an enzyme, oh gosh, time out. All right, are we back? All right. There's an enzyme that is located right here. All right, and I'll put the name up. This is called adenocyclase because this enzyme is going to become active when adrenaline binds to its receptor. And what it does, this enzyme called adenocyclase, it will take ATP that's inside the cell. We've seen the production of ATP many times. ATP is going to be converted to an analog of ATP, a related molecule called AMP. And I think we've seen this before as well. This is adenosine monophosphate. This is adenosine triphosphate. So there's going to be a change in ATP due to this enzyme, adenocyclase, and it's going to produce a cyclic molecule. All right, it's going to have some kind of a ring structure to it. All right, and this ring structure is called cyclic AMP. Now, cyclic AMP is often given the abbreviation CAMP. CAMP, cyclic AMP. And cyclic AMP, when it's produced, acts as what's called a second messenger or a secondary messenger. The hormone is the primary messenger. Cyclic AMP is the secondary messenger. And what this molecule does is it goes throughout the cell and it activates enzymes that are already present but are in their inactive form. Something like, remembering from grade 11, pepsinogen being converted to pepsin or trypsinogen being converted to trypsin. Now, those conversions required an enzyme. Cyclic AMP is not an enzyme. It's a secondary messenger, but it's going to do the same kind of thing. It's going to activate enzymes that are already present in the cell and just waiting to be activated. They will then go and do whatever job is necessary. So adrenaline carries sort of the message of what needs to be done, and it does it through an intermediary molecule, cyclic AMP, which activates the enzymes, and the enzymes then go and do the effect, whether it's the release of glucose or the increase of heartbeat or whatever it is. Now, because these enzymes are already present, this is a faster process here using the modified amino acid, and this works for protein hormones as well, whether we're talking insulin or glucagon or some of the other protein hormones. In addition to the modified amino acids, it's the same kind of process, binding to a receptor on the cell membrane as opposed to diffusing right into the cell in the case of the steroids. So this is a faster process than this one because the enzymes are already present, whereas the molecule produced here, and it could be an enzyme. Remember, enzymes are proteins. So if this steroid mode of action led to the production of an enzyme, again, we've got an enzyme here, we've got an enzyme over here, but this one is a faster process than this. And that's something I'd like you to know. So hopefully that clears up the mode of action of these hormones. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to have a look at glands and hormones of the endocrine system. You have this printout. You should have it there in front of you, and I'm going to go through basically filling in these blanks for you and looking at a couple of diagrams. So have that there, and let's talk about the thyroid gland. You've all heard about the thyroid gland before. You may have seen it when you dissected the fetal pig. The thyroid gland is up in the throat region. This is the thorax right here. So here we have the throat. So it's relatively up in the throat, and it's in front of the trachea here. So this is the thyroid gland. It looks a little bit like a letter W or letter H. There are various lobes of the thyroid gland. We're not going to talk about that specifically, but there it is, rather high up in the chest, up into the throat region. And if you were to turn it over and look at the backside, it would look something like this. And we want to focus on these structures right here on the back. There are 4 of them, and these are the parathyroid glands. Para sort of indicating that they're off towards the side. They're like parapsychology, a side branch of psychology. All right, so let's go through this. The thyroid gland produces thyroid hormone, and there are 2 sort of versions of this. There is one called T3 and one called T4. The first one stands for triiodothyronine, and this implies that there are 3 iodine atoms in the thyroid hormone. The second one, T4, is tetraiodothyronine because there are 4 iodine atoms. And I showed you a diagram, a diagram of this in class where we have 4 iodine atoms on the thyroid hormone. Actually, thyroid hormone is also called thyroxine. Now, some people put an E on the end, some people don't. So thyroxine is often used to refer to this one. This is the more active version of the thyroid hormone, but there is T3, and in general, we can just call them thyroxine or thyroid hormone. Now, the target of the thyroid hormones is most cells, and they stimulate metabolism. So we studied cellular respiration metabolism before, and this hormone is involved with making that process occur, to stimulate it to occur. Because metabolism produces heat as a byproduct, the stimulation of metabolism by thyroid hormone increases body temperature, and it will also increase oxygen consumption. And you know that oxygen is needed for aerobic cellular respiration. Thyroid hormone also works in association with STH, which stands for somatotropic hormone, or somatotropin, which is also called growth hormone. So you're going to see that there are often multiple names for the same hormone, and that makes it more complex, but also more fun to learn, right? So this is one of the main hormones produced by the thyroid gland, which is the thyroid hormones. Now, there's another hormone called calcitonin, and you can see in the name that it's going to have an effect on calcium. Calcium is stored in the bones, so the target for calcitonin is the bones, whereas the target of thyroid hormone is most cells. And calcitonin decreases calcium in the blood. So if you've got the bloodstream right here, there's a blood vessel, and you've got calcium in the bloodstream, what happens is calcitonin causes calcium to come out of the blood. Here's our calcium, like this, and then go into the bones. So that's the job of calcitonin. Now, it works antagonistically to a hormone called parathormone or parathyroid hormone, or even PTH, which we're going to talk about down here. The concept of antagonism means it works oppositely. So if calcitonin decreases calcium in the blood, then parathormone is going to do the opposite and increase the calcium in the blood, and it's going to take it predominantly from the bones. So this one puts calcium from the blood into the bones, and this one takes calcium from the bones and puts it in the blood. So parathormone has the abbreviation of PTH, and I'd like you to know both long names and abbreviations, and it is released from the 4 small glands on the back of the thyroid gland, these ones right here, the parathyroid glands. So the target of parathyroid hormone or parathormone is going to be the bones, of course, but it also has an effect on the kidney because, as you may or may not know, the kidney filters the blood. So the blood comes into the kidney through the renal artery, and whatever waste products or stuff that's not needed by the body or excesses, those will get excreted from the kidney down into the urinary bladder and urinated out. Well, calcium as an ionic substance is very soluble in water, and of course urine is predominantly water, and so sometimes calcium will go out in the urine and will be lost from the body. Under the influence of parathormone, that calcium does not go out in the urine. It stays in the bloodstream, so it would come out the renal vein. So this hormone has an effect on the kidney to cause it to conserve calcium, and that effect will raise the blood calcium. So it increases calcium in the blood, and of course calcium in the ionic form, by stimulating the release from bones, and of course dealing with the reabsorption of the kidney. So you should write something about reabsorbing calcium right here, for the kidney, so that you remember that. Let's talk about the pancreas now, and we want to deal with 3 hormones in the pancreas. Over here we have a picture of the stomach and the location of the pancreas underneath the stomach, and we've got the duodenum here showing that the pancreas releases various enzymes that you've heard of, and bicarbonate and such, into the duodenum for the process of digestion. Now that is an exocrine function of the pancreas, the release of enzymes, bicarbonate, that kind of thing. But the pancreas also produces various hormones, and that's illustrated right down here. This is the endocrine portion. So wherever you see this purple, there are clusters of cells that have an endocrine, not an exocrine function, and these endocrine cells are what produce the various hormones. Now this diagram highlights insulin and glucagon, the 2 most famous of the hormones. This picture up here is a picture through an electron microscope showing the tissue of the pancreas, and I don't know how well you can make it out, but there's a cluster of cells right here that looks a little bit like an island in the Islands in the Sea, or whatever. Islands in the Stream, that Kenny Rogers song. And this is called the island, or often it's called the islet of Langerhans, after the individual who discovered it. So these islands of Langerhans, and there are many of them, there's one here, and one here, and here, and here. And you're going to see this again in the microscope lab. These islets are where you have the cells that produce insulin and glucagon, and another hormone down here, somatostatin. Whereas you see up here it says exocrine, secretory, acini. These are the cells that produce the various pancreatic enzymes, trypsinogen and pancreatic lipase and pancreatic amylase and bicarbonate. But it's the islet of Langerhans here that produces the hormones. And these hormones, of course, will be released right into blood vessels that are surrounding it, where the enzymes that are produced in this region will go through the pancreatic duct into the duodenum. All right, so let's talk specifically about insulin. Insulin is produced by beta cells. There are beta cells here in this islet of Langerhans, and we're not going to identify which ones they are, but that's the name of the cells. The target for insulin, liver and muscles, because this is where glucose is going to be stored as glycogen. So Insulin decreases blood sugar. In other words, it reduces hyperglycemia. Hyperglycemia means high, hyper, glyce for sugar, emia for blood. This is high blood sugar. So when you have a meal and you've got lots of glucose in your bloodstream, that glucose will come out of the blood into surrounding cells in the liver and in muscles. And that's where the glucose is going to be stored. It's going to cause increase glucose storage in the liver and muscles. And of course, the glucose will be stored as glycogen, that polymer that we studied, the polymer of glucose. And that's the storage form in animals. It will be stored in both liver and muscles. And insulin allows the glucose to come in to the liver and muscles. So remember that name right there, or that little prefix there, insulin. Insulin also helps to promote the synthesis of proteins and fats. We're not going to get into that, but the idea is that, and you may remember from the metabolism, remember seeing that entry of foods diagram, excuse me, where we had carbohydrates up here, and we had proteins, and we had lipids, and you saw how they all can feed into metabolism and stuff like that. Well, some of these steps can go backwards as well, and you can have carbohydrates or glucose, and you can convert them to proteins or convert them into lipids. I mean, think of it this way. If you eat 1,000 chocolate bars, you're going to get fat, right? It's not the sugar itself that's going to make you fat. It's the fact that the sugar can be converted to lipid. Not to mention the fact that there is fat in chocolate bars anyhow. But that's the idea that I wanted to get across, that it promotes the synthesis of proteins and fats because glucose can be converted into these substances and then stored, altered from the glucose form. Now, insulin is antagonistic to a molecule called glucagon. Now, don't go putting a Y here. It's not glycagon and it's not glycogen. This is a hormone called glucagon, again, from the islet of Langerhans. We'll talk about it down here. And insulin does the opposite to this one. So let's talk about glucagon. Glucagon is produced not by beta cells, but by alpha cells, again in the islets of Langerhans, and the targets are the same, liver and muscles. But this time, glucagon increases blood sugar levels. So it takes the glucose out of the liver and muscles and puts it back into the bloodstream. In other words, if you are experiencing a temporary hypoglycemia, low blood sugar, and you need more glucose in the blood, let's say for use by the brain or some other active tissue, then glucagon would come out of the pancreas, not into the duodenum here, but into the bloodstream and travel to the liver and the muscles over here and cause glycogen to be converted into glucose. And now that glucose is in the bloodstream and is available for the brain or for any other structure that needs it. So you can see that both of these hormones, glucagon and insulin, act oppositely. So it stimulates glycogen breakdown to release the glucose, and it's, of course, antagonistic to insulin. Now, you can remember glucagon releasing the glucose by the ending here, gone. This is like glucose is gone from the liver or muscles, whereas up here, insulin, glucose goes in. So that's one thing that may help you. I'm not sure. Now, another hormone that we're not going to say a lot about, I don't know a lot about this one, is called somatostatin. And whenever you see this statin thing, it refers to sort of maintaining homeostasis, keeping things constant and regulated and stuff. Somatostatin is produced by delta cells, so we have alpha, beta, and delta cells. The target is the insulin-secreting cells. It helps to moderate them, to regulate them, and control them, and it will stimulate carbohydrate metabolism. So just think of it as sort of a check and balance on insulin release. And that's all we're going to say about somatostatin. Not going to focus a lot on that. Okay. Over to the pineal gland. Melatonin is the major hormone released by the pineal gland. We've seen this gland before in the nervous system. Of course, it's up here in the brain region, and melatonin is the name of the hormone, and it is going to actually target other parts of the brain. And these other parts of the brain are involved with the regulation, the control of sleep-wake cycles and various biorhythms. In other animals, more of the reproductive cycle. So the pineal gland sort of controls those through other parts of the brain. So melatonin will be released by the pineal gland. It will go to parts of the brain, and that's where the sleep-wake cycle and other biorhythms will be affected. The pineal gland is light sensitive, so when light comes into the body, into the head, melatonin will be released in us and in some other animals, and it's released in the absence of light. Sorry, I think I may have said that a little bit backwards. The pineal gland is light sensitive, and as a result, the melatonin is going to be released in the absence of light, promoting sleep. So what I'm saying is, at nighttime, when there is a decrease in light, melatonin will be released. So here's the melatonin coming out in the absence of light. Melatonin causes a drowsiness effect, and in the daylight, when the sun comes up, here's the sun shining, and your body perceives it partially through the eyes and any other mechanism that gets light through. When that light hits the pineal gland, it decreases the release of melatonin. If you think of melatonin like a sleeping pill, all right, if you decrease melatonin, then you start to wake up, come out of that slumber. So that's how that works. The thymus gland is located close to the thyroid. Here's the thyroid up in the neck. And the thymus gland is sort of midway between the thyroid and the heart, lying just above the heart. So we've got these three structures in a row. All right, the thymus gland releases a hormone called thymosin, and the target of thymosin are immune cells. So it stimulates the immune system. So thymosin, a hormone from the thymus, affects the immune system so that you can fight infection. Okay, now that covers much of that endocrine and gland sheet, but not all of it. We're going to leave the rest for later, the adrenal and stuff like that. What I want you to work on now are the hormone cue cards. So you should have hormone cue cards. If you don't have your cards here today, perhaps you could borrow some from somebody else, and then you could repay them next day, because I'd like you to have a number of these done for when I'm back. Now, this represents one cue card, the front of the cue card here, and the back of the cue card here. And what I want you to do is on the front of the cue card, write the full name of the hormone, watch your spelling, get it right, and then any abbreviation or alternative name that there might be. So for example, parathormone over here is the full name of the hormone, and then the abbreviation is PTH. And if you want to write parathyroid hormone, you could do that as well. Some of them will have just one name and no abbreviation, and others will be different. On the back of the card, you're going to write the source, so where the hormone comes from. So you go back to your sheets, stuff we've talked about, go to the textbook if need be. Then you're going to write the target or targets, so you're just listing stuff here on the back of the card. And then down here, you're going to write the major effects or the primary function of the hormone. Now, the word primary function, I mention that because when you come to do the pituitary hormones, it talks about primary functions, not effects. So either term would work. So I want you to do these hormones here, which are from the worksheet that we just talked about, all right? Thyroid hormone, calcitonin, parathormone, etc. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You've got 8 cue cards, front and back, and then there are a number of pituitary hormones. on page 377 of your textbook in table 1, basically what you're doing is transcribing that information onto your cue cards. So you're going to have a bunch of cue cards, and that's not all there is yet. Okay, we got a bunch more to go, but you will have a nice stack of cue cards. You can put a little hole in it up here. You can tie a string or some other way, put a clip in there, and you will have a little booklet that you can use to study from. All right, so what I want you to do is write these down now. Or, of course, you've got them on your sheet, so maybe just remember that you're doing the pituitary hormones from this part of the book, or pause the video here, go ahead and work on your hormone cue cards, and please have them done for next class. All right, I hope that helped. See you again soon.